Find a comfortable position. Let your body relax. Take one slow breath in and let it go. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing to do. Just rest and let the story carry you gently away. You are about to fall asleep. And before you do, I want to tell you about the most misunderstood warriors in history. Not because they were hidden, not because the evidence was unclear, but because for almost 200 years, the people looking at the evidence assumed they already knew the answer. And when you assume you already know, you stop seeing what is actually in front of you. Tonight, we go back to Scandinavia, to the age of the longships, to a world where women could own land, choose their own husbands, divorce men who bored them, run trade routes, lead armies, and die with a sword in their hand, and be buried like the warrior they were. There is a grave we are going to visit tonight, a famous one. For 140 years, everyone who studied it was certain they knew who was lying inside. They were wrong, and the moment they discovered how wrong, the whole story of the Viking Age had to be quietly rewritten. We will get to that grave. Hold the thought. Tonight we meet the women the history books almost lost. Close your eyes, take a breath. The story begins now. Let me start with a number, 40%. In a study published in 2019 analyzing Viking Age skeletal remains from sites across Scandinavia, researchers found that approximately 40% of the individuals buried with weapons were female. Not the majority, not an anomaly. 40%. That is not a cultural exception. That is not a handful of unusual women who happen to pick up a sword. That is a society in which a significant portion of the female population was buried with the tools of a warrior. Shields, spears, axes, in some cases full sets of battle equipment. The implications of that number take a moment to fully absorb. We have been telling the story of the Viking Age as the story of men with axes, and the men were there. The axes were real, but the story was never only theirs. Think about how this happens. A discipline inherits a picture. The picture feels obvious, so no one questions it, and every new piece of evidence gets quietly sorted to fit the picture rather than to test it. A weapon in a grave means a man, because men carry weapons, because the graves with weapons are men's graves, because, and round it goes, a circle closing on itself, sealing out the very fact it was built on top of. It took a laboratory to break the circle, not a new excavation, not a lost manuscript, just a willingness to ask a question that everyone had assumed was already answered. And the answer, when it came, did not whisper. It arrived with the quiet, total certainty of a chromosome. The skeleton from Birka, Sweden is worth spending time on, because it changed everything. Grave BJ 581 was excavated in the 1870s by archaeologist Hjalmar Stolpa. He found a high-status burial, a complete set of weapons including a sword, a spear, battle knives, and shields. 2 horses had been buried with the individual, a mark of senior military status. Gaming pieces used for strategic planning were also present. Those gaming pieces matter more than they sound. They were not for idle entertainment. They were the tools of a commander, pieces used to model formations, to plan the movement of forces across ground. You do not bury a foot soldier with a strategist's board. You bury a leader with it. Stolp identified the burial as male. Everyone who came after him assumed the same. For 140 years, BJ 581 was cited in academic literature as a prime example of a Viking warrior's grave. It appeared in textbooks. It was drawn and redrawn, a confident illustration of a Norse war leader, broad-shouldered, bearded, sword across the lap. In 2017, a team at Stockholm University ran a DNA analysis on the skeletal remains. The warrior was female. XX chromosomes. Unambiguous. Her bones also showed something interesting. No markers of heavy manual labor typical of agricultural workers. Her muscle attachments suggested a life of physical activity of a different kind, consistent with weapons training, riding, and combat. She was not a farmer who happened to be buried with weapons. She was a warrior who had spent her life becoming one. And she had been hiding in plain sight for 140 years, because the people looking at her had already decided what they would find. When the results were published, some scholars objected. Perhaps the bones had been mixed. Perhaps the weapons belonged to someone else. The team went back and checked. The DNA matched the bones in the grave. The bones matched the weapons. There was no second skeleton, no mix-up, no convenient confusion. There was only a woman, buried as a commander, with 2 horses and a strategist board, exactly as she had been laid down 1100 years before. Stay with Birka a moment longer, because the place itself tells you why a warrior would be buried there. Birka was not a sleepy fishing village. It was one of the great trading towns of the Viking world, set on an island in a lake west of where Stockholm stands today. Ships came to it from across the known world, furs from the far north, silver from the Islamic caliphates, coins struck in Baghdad and Samarkand finding their way into Swedish soil, glass, silk, beads, weapons, slaves. It was a hinge of commerce, and hinges of commerce need defending. A town like that had a garrison. It had a hall for warriors, a fortified rampart, a need for people who could organize defense and command in a crisis. And the warrior in BJ 581 was buried right beside that garrison, in a prominent grave, with the gaming board of someone who planned the movement of armed people across ground. She was not a curiosity dropped into the record by chance. She was, in all likelihood, exactly what her grave says she was, a person of military rank in a town that needed military rank, buried among her own kind. The setting does not merely allow the interpretation, it expects it. It is only our assumptions, again, that ever made her strange. You are settling now. The story is finding its rhythm. Let me tell you what the word actually means. Skjaldmær. That is the Old Norse term usually translated as shield maiden. Skjald means shield. Mær means young woman, maiden, girl. But the word in the sagas carries no connotation of novelty, no sense of unusual female warrior. It appears matter-of-factly, the way the sagas mention farmers or ship captains or traders. Skjaldmær is a role, a recognized category of person, a thing that existed in Norse society without requiring explanation or apology. In Hervarar saga Oke Heidreks, the protagonist Hervor is a Skjaldmær who travels to the island of the dead to claim her father's cursed sword. She is afraid of nothing. She is practical, fierce, and matter-of-fact about who she is. The saga does not pause to marvel at her. It simply follows her, the way a story follows any hero who has decided what they want and gone to take it. In Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum, written around the year 1200, he describes hundreds of women fighting alongside Danish forces in a specific battle. He is not celebrating them. He is not writing a feminist text. He is simply recording what happened, the way you record any military fact. This is the tell. The sagas do not treat female warriors as shocking. They treat them as a type of person that exists, with specific characteristics and specific roles. That is the literary signature of something real. Invented things tend to announce themselves. They come wrapped in wonder, in explanation, in the storyteller leaning forward to say, "Can you believe it?" The Skjaldmær gets none of that. She is mentioned and the sentence moves on. That casualness is the fingerprint of fact. Now let me tell you something that connects to your world right now. There is a word you say almost every week without thinking about where it came from. Friday. It comes from Frigg, or possibly Freya. The two are tangled in the old sources, a Norse goddess associated with love, fate, and in Freya's case, with war and the choosing of the slain. Friday is, quite literally, her day. You have been keeping a Norse appointment on your calendar your whole life and never knew it. And in 2024, every major streaming platform had multiple series featuring female warriors in fantasy or historical settings. Shield maidens in television dramas, warrior queens in prestige films. The archetype is everywhere. It sells tickets, generates subscriptions, drives social media engagement. But here is the strange thing. The culture is fascinated with the idea of these women precisely because it feels transgressive, like a historical fantasy, like something that could not have really existed. And meanwhile, the DNA evidence sits in peer-reviewed journals, patiently confirming that it did exist. That 40% number is not going away. The Burqa warrior is not going anywhere. The culture is hungry for a story that history actually contains, if anyone would look directly at it. You are not watching fiction. You are watching the present struggle to catch up with the past. Let the story breathe for a moment. Let your body go heavier. The longhouse at night, a fire at the center, the smell of wood smoke and salt air coming under the door. A woman is sitting near the fire, sharpening a blade. Not because she is afraid, because a blade that is not sharp is a blade that does not work. She does this the same way she would mend a sail or preserve meat or check the rigging on a ship. It is maintenance. It is craft. The whetstone makes a long, slow sound against the iron, a sound like breathing, a sound like the sea pulling back over shingle. She is not hurrying. There is nothing to hurry toward. The work is the point. Her name in this particular moment of the story does not matter. What matters is the quality of her attention, the steadiness of her hands, the total absence of doubt. She knows exactly who she is. Around her, the longhouse sleeps. The animals are quiet in their end of the building, their warmth rising into the dark. A child turns over under a wool blanket. The fire settles, sending up a single thread of sparks. And the woman by the fire draws the stone down the blade one more time, tests the edge against her thumb, and is satisfied. Let me tell you about the rites that made this possible. Because the Shield Maiden did not emerge from nowhere. She emerged from a legal and social system that was, by the standards of the ancient world, remarkably equitable. In Norse law, codified in texts like the Gragas, Iceland's medieval law code, women had rights that would not appear in English common law for nearly 1,000 years. A Norse woman could own property independently of her husband. She could inherit. She could conduct legal business. She could divorce her husband by announcing it in front of witnesses, at the front door, at the bed, and at the main assembly, called the Thing. 3 announcements, and the marriage was legally dissolved. She kept her dowry. She kept property she had brought into the marriage. The children could go with her if she chose. There were grounds a woman could cite, and the sagas record them with a frankness that can still raise an eyebrow. A man who was violent, a man who could not provide, a man who wore a shirt cut too low at the neck, which sounds trivial until you understand that in that culture it carried a specific connotation of effeminacy and broken social roles. The point is not the specific grounds. The point is that a woman stood at the door of her own house, said the words, walked to the thing, said them again, and was free. There is a saga moment that makes this concrete. In one account, a woman named Aud the Deep-Minded, a real historical figure, a matriarch of the early settlement of Iceland, commanded her own ship, captained her own crew, and led an entire migration across the North Atlantic. When she had decided her life in the British Isles was over, she had a ship built in secret, gathered her household, and sailed. She distributed land to her followers like a chieftain. She arranged marriages, settled disputes, and at the end of her life, staged her own grand funeral feast, handing out her wealth on her own terms, and died, the sources say, with dignity intact and authority unbroken. No man features in the story as her superior. She is the prime mover from first sentence to last. Compare this to medieval England, where a woman's legal identity merged entirely with her husband's upon marriage, where she could not own property, sign contracts, or appear in court on her own behalf, where divorce was effectively impossible. The Viking world was not a feminist utopia. Power was not evenly distributed. Men held most of the senior positions in most Norse societies. But the floor, the baseline legal rights of an ordinary woman, was dramatically higher than anything else available in the early medieval world. And that floor made the Shield Maiden possible, because a woman who can own property can own weapons. A woman who can inherit a warrior's training. A woman who has legal standing can make a legal choice to fight. Sleep is moving closer. Let the words come from a little further away now. There is a detail in the Norse keys that I love. The mistress of a household carried a ring of keys at her belt, to the storeroom, the chests, the valuables. It was not decoration. It was authority made visible. The keys said, "This person controls the wealth of this house." Decisions about food, about trade goods, about silver, ran through her hands. When a husband sailed away on a voyage that might last a season or might last forever, the keys stayed home, and so did the power they represented. The farm ran because she ran it. The trade continued because she conducted it. The accounts balanced because she balanced them. So when we picture the Viking Age, we picture the ships leaving, but we should also picture what they left behind. Thousands of households across Scandinavia, where for months at a time, a woman held every key, made every decision, and answered to no one. That is not a footnote to the warrior tradition. It is the soil the warrior tradition grew in. Now the question people always ask, did they actually fight, or were they just buried with weapons for symbolic reasons? The honest answer is both things happened, and the distinction may matter less than it seems. Some women were buried with weapons as symbols of status or household protection, the same way a successful merchant might be buried with scales and weights. The presence of weapons did not automatically mean combat experience. But the Burka warrior's bones tell a different story. Her physical development was consistent with weapons training. The grave goods included equipment for both combat and strategic command. The horses indicated senior military rank. And she was not alone. A grave in Nordre Kjølen, Norway, contained a female skeleton with a full set of weapons, including an axe with battle damage on it, meaning it had been used, and used hard. Battle-damaged weapons do not end up in graves by accident. Someone used that axe. That someone was a woman, and they used it enough to leave marks. There is a quiet honesty to physical evidence that no amount of assumption can argue with. An assumption can outlive 140 years. A notch in an iron axe head cannot be talked out of existence. It is simply there, where someone struck something hard enough to deform the metal, and then carried that axe long enough that when she died, it was buried with her as part of who she was. Sleep is settling around you now. The fire is lower, the blade is sharp. Let me tell you about Lagertha, not the television version, the one in the source material. Saxo Grammaticus describes Lagertha as a warrior who fought alongside Ragnar Lothbrok in a campaign against Norway. She commanded her own forces. She is described as having the courage of a man and the beauty of a woman, which is Saxo's way of saying she was both things at once, neither canceling the other. In one account, she fights with her hair loose, and it becomes a kind of signature on the battlefield, a sight the enemy learns to fear. There is something almost cinematic in it, and yet Saxo reports it without any sense that it is remarkable for a woman to be there at all. The remarkable thing to him is her skill, not her sex. After the campaign, Ragnar wanted to marry her. She set conditions. They were married. Later, they divorced, by her choice, on her terms. She went back to governing her own territory. What is striking about Saxo's account is not the extraordinary parts. It is the ordinary parts. The matter-of-fact tone in which he describes her commanding troops, making strategic decisions, ending a marriage on her own initiative. He is not marveling, he is reporting. When a medieval historian who has never met a female warrior in his own world describes one without visible surprise, it suggests he is working from sources that took her existence for granted. Let your thoughts drift while I tell you about a stranger figure. The Valkyrie. In Norse belief, the Valkyries were female beings who rode over the battlefield and chose which of the slain would be taken to Valhalla, the hall of the honored dead. Their name means, roughly, choosers of the slain. They were not gentle. They were not decorative. They held, in the imagination of an entire culture, the power to decide who lived in glory after death and who did not. Now think about what it means that a warrior society, a society that prized battle death above almost anything, placed the final judgment of the warrior in female hands. The men fought, but in the story they told themselves about what fighting meant, it was women who decided whose fighting had mattered. You do not build a mythology like that in a culture where women and weapons are unthinkable together. The myth and the graves agree. The choosers of the slain in the sky and the woman with the battle-notched axe in the ground are two expressions of the same idea, that a woman could belong fully and without apology to the world of war. The Valkyrie was not a fantasy laid on top of a male reality. She was the reflection in the mirror of myth, of something the culture already knew to be possible on the earth. There is another kind of power in this world that we should not pass over, because it sat very close to war. The vulva, the seeress, the practitioner of the magic the Norse called Sather. A vulva traveled from settlement to settlement. She was received with honor, given the high seat, fed the best of what the household had. And then in a trance, with chanting and ritual, she was believed to see into the future, into the hidden, into the weave of fate itself. Even Odin, the chief of the gods, was said to practice this magic and to be faintly shamed by it, because it sat outside the expected role of a male warrior. The power was real enough in the Norse imagination that the highest god both wanted it and was uneasy holding it. Graves of these women have been found. One at Furkat in Denmark held a woman buried with a metal wand, the staff of the seeress, and with henbane seeds, a plant that alters the mind. She was laid to rest with toe rings and foreign objects and clear marks of high status. She was not a warrior, but she was powerful, feared, and free in a way that mattered. I tell you this so you understand the Shield Maiden was not the only door. A woman in this world could reach authority through the sword, through the keys of the household, through trade, through migration, or through the wand and the trance. There were many roads up. The warrior is only the one we can see most clearly in the iron. Here is a curiosity worth holding as you sink lower. The Viking world did not have a single unified concept of gender that mapped neatly onto modern categories, but it had a concept called ergi, a complex term that described the violation of expected social roles. What was considered shameful was not the content of the role, but the refusal to commit to it fully. A man who was a warrior was expected to be fully a warrior. A woman who was a healer was expected to master healing completely. A woman who chose to be a skaldmer was expected to do that with the same total commitment. The shame was in half measures, in pretending, in claiming a role you had not earned. The Shield Maidens in the sources are described as warriors, not despite being women, but as the particular kind of warrior that a woman with those specific skills in that specific culture could become. They were not exceptions to the Viking world. They were expressions of it. You may be losing the thread of individual sentences now. That is exactly right. Let the meaning blur and the images stay. A coastline at dawn, gray water going gold. A row of shields along the rail of a ship, painted in faded reds and yellows, salt-stained, real. The slow creak of timber, a figure standing in the bow, cloak pulled close, watching the land come up out of the sea. It does not matter, for the dream, whether the figure is a man or a woman. That is rather the whole point of everything we have said tonight. The figure is simply a person who knows the sea, knows the ship, knows the weight of the shield, and is not afraid of the shore. The ship comes on, the water parts at the prow, and the cold gold light spreads across the deck, where a crew that history has only ever half described goes quietly about its work. Let me hold you in that ship a little longer, because the long ship is where so much of this world lived and breathed. It was a marvel of engineering, shallow enough to run right up onto a beach, light enough to be carried overland between rivers, strong enough to cross open ocean. There were no separate quarters on it, no privacy, no place to hide who you were. Everyone aboard rowed, bailed, ate the same salted food, slept on the same open deck under the same wet sky, and faced the same sea that did not care at all about anyone's rank or name. A ship like that is a brutal leveler. The sea does not ask whether the hands on the oar are a man's or a woman's. It asks only whether they pull. And a crew that crossed the North Atlantic in an open boat learned very quickly to value people by what they could actually do, because their lives depended on the answer, every single day, from the moment the land dropped behind them to the moment new land rose ahead. So picture the deck again, the shields along the rail, the slow rhythm of the oars, and among the figures pulling in time, some of them women, not as a statement, not as an exception, but because the boat needed strong hands, and theirs were strong, and the sea was waiting, and there was a far shore to reach before dark. Now we return to the grave, the one I asked you to hold at the very beginning. Do you remember? the famous burial that everyone was certain they understood. We have already met her, the Burka warrior, BJ 581. But I held something back. I want to tell you now what it actually felt like in the field of study when the answer arrived. For 140 years, BJ 581 was not a mystery. It was a settled fact, a fixed point. Scholars built arguments on it. They used it as the model of what a high-status warrior grave looked like. It was, in a sense, load-bearing, a piece of the foundation. And then the laboratory said, female. And every argument that had leaned on the assumption had to be re-examined. Not because the grave had changed. The grave had been saying the same thing since the year it was dug. It was the listeners who had to change. This is the resolution to the question we opened with. The reason these warriors were almost lost was never a lack of evidence. The evidence was abundant. It was in the ground the whole time. What was missing was the willingness to read it without a conclusion already in hand. And here is the larger question that opens behind the answer, the one that should keep historians honest for a generation. If we were this wrong, for this long, about something buried this plainly, what else are we certain of right now that the ground is quietly waiting to correct? Your breathing is slowing now. The story is becoming a dream. Let me give you one more image to carry with you. In a grave in Solor, Norway, buried around the year 900, archaeologists found a woman interred with her weapons, her horse, and a set of personal ornaments. Brooches and pins of the kind that marked social status in the Norse world. The ornaments said this was a woman of standing in her community. The weapons said she was prepared to defend that standing with her body. The horse said she was mobile, independent, and senior enough to have earned a second grave companion. She was buried as a complete person, not as a warrior pretending to be a woman, or a woman pretending to be a warrior. As one person who held both things at once, without contradiction. The grave did not explain her. It simply described her. And here she is, 1,200 years later, being described to you. Still uncontradicted. Still whole. Let me tell you how a girl might have come to this, in the slow, ordinary way that real lives are made. She would have grown up in a longhouse like any other. She would have learned to spin and weave, because everyone learned to spin and weave. And the cloth of the household was wealth as surely as silver was. She would have learned to manage stores, to salt fish, to read weather, to handle a small boat. And if there were weapons in the house, and someone willing to teach, she might have learned those too. Not in a special academy, not as a ceremony, just in the long evenings and idle afternoons, the way children learn whatever the adults around them are doing. A wooden practice blade first, then a real one, blunt, then one day, a real one, sharp. There is no dramatic moment of choosing in this version. There rarely is in real lives. There's only an accumulation of ordinary days, each one adding a little skill, a little confidence, a little weight to the hand. Until one morning, she is simply a person who can fight, the way she is a person who can sail, because both are things she spent her childhood learning while no one was making a story of it. That is how most of them came to it, I think. Not through legend, through Tuesdays. Let me say a quiet word about the cost, because no honest story of warriors leaves it out, and then we will turn fully towards sleep. A battle-notched axe means someone was struck. The woman who carried it was, at some point, close enough to another human being to feel the shock of iron meeting bone travel up her arms. That is not a glamour. That is the plain, heavy fact underneath the word warrior, for any warrior of any kind in any age. The grave goods that thrill us, the swords, the horses, the gaming pieces of command, are also, read another way, the record of a hard life, of cold mornings and longer odds, of the particular loneliness of being the person others look to when the line wavers. The Shield Maiden carried all of that too, the same as any man who held a shield wall in the gray light. I do not say this to darken the story. I say it because respect requires it. These women were not a fantasy of empowerment. They were people who took up a real and dangerous trade and were good enough at it to be buried as masters of it. The honor in the grave is earned honor. It weighs something. And tonight, 1,200 years on, the least we can do is let it weigh what it actually weighed. Now let the weight of it become the weight of sleep and set it down. The longhouse is very still now. The fire has burned to coals. The woman with the blade has put it away. Outside, the fjord is dark and the stars are beginning to appear. Cold points of light, unchanged from the night she looked up at them 1,000 years ago. This is what survival looks like. Not a monument, not a text. A pattern of choices that leaves marks in bone and metal and stone, that outlasts the person who made them, that speaks forward across 12 centuries to say, I was here, I was real, I was exactly what you are only now beginning to believe. The coals breathe orange and dim, the salt air moves under the door, and the house, with all its sleeping warmth, settles another inch toward morning. You are almost there now. The weight of sleep is all around you. Let the images come slowly. A ship on dark water, a hand on a sword hilt, steady, unhurried, a fire in the dark. The Shield Maiden who rode to the thing to announce her divorce in front of witnesses, who then went home, fed her children, checked her weapons, and made a plan for the following week. The healer who treated wounds in the morning and picked up a spear in the afternoon. Both things true, both things whole. The woman in burqa, buried with 2 horses and a strategic mind, whose DNA took 1,400 years to confirm what her grave had been saying all along. They are all the same person, the same refusal to be reduced, the same insistence on being exactly what they were. Let the last few thoughts loosen and fall away. Somewhere out there, still in the ground, there are more of them. Graves not yet opened, bones not yet tested, assumptions not yet overturned. The 40% is not a final number. It is a floor. The story is still being corrected, quietly, one excavation at a time, and every correction points the same direction. There were more of them than we thought, and they were more ordinary than we imagined. And ordinary is the most remarkable thing of all. And consider, as you drift, how much of them is still with you. The days of your week carry their gods. The word law itself comes down to English from Old Norse, carried by these people to the shores of Britain. If your ancestry touches Northern Europe, some thread of you may run back to a longhouse like the one we sat in tonight, to a fire like that fire, to a woman like that woman with the whetstone and the steady hands. They did not vanish. They became the ordinary furniture of the world you woke up in this morning, so woven into it that you stopped being able to see them, which is, of course, exactly how this whole story began. You do not need to remember any of this in the morning. The number, the names, the law codes. Let them go. They will keep. They have kept for 1,000 years. They will keep until you want them again. Keep only the picture. The fire gone to coals, the blade put away, the keys on the belt and the shield on the wall, and the stars over the dark water, the same stars, the very same stars. And if you want to know more about the world that made them possible, the politics, the laws, the thing assemblies that gave Norse women their rights, that is a story we have waiting for you. Another night, another fire, another thread to follow. But for now, you sleep. The water is dark and still. The stars are very bright. Somewhere across the fjord, a shield is leaning against a wall, its surface marked with